Is Israel really a British ally? Israel has killed or injured numerous British aid workers in Gaza over the last year, and this isn't the first time that Israeli-made weapons have been used to attack British citizens. Joining me now to discuss this is my colleague John McAvoy, who's been investigating how Argentina used Israeli-made weapons to kill British soldiers during the Falklands War in 1982. Hi John, how are you?
Hi Phil, yeah, I'm alright, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. I've just been reading this fascinating article that you've written for us about the chaos inside the Foreign Office that was caused when they realised Israel, a supposed ally, was arming Britain's enemy during a deadly war. Can you tell me about some of the most surprising things that you found from these files at the National Archives?
The main thing really is that Israel armed Argentina before, during and after the Falklands War. The Israelis sold to the Argentine dictatorship, which, bear in mind, was notoriously anti-Semitic, fighter jets. Argentina also used Israeli-supplied fighter jets to bomb 4 British warships, including the Sir Galahad, resulting in scores of deaths of British soldiers. One of the surprising things is the degree to which the Israelis sought to deceive and mislead the British Foreign Office while they were supplying the Argentines with weapons. And you can see this in the declassified documents. Throughout the entire course of the war, the Foreign Office is going to the Israeli Embassy in London. They're also going to the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and they're saying, look, we're aware that you are supplying arms to Argentina. Can you please clarify what you are supplying, and can you please stop doing so? And the Israelis come back and they're kind of constantly saying, look, we had some arms deals with Argentina prior to the war that we're going to honour. However, they're not significant, they're not very important, they're not going to be fatal if used against British troops. Now, as the war dragged on, British intelligence became increasingly aware that the Israelis were not telling the truth at all.
And what did the Foreign Office do when their initial complaints to the Israeli authorities didn't seem to have any effect?
The Ministry of Defence actually set up a kind of arms intel unit within the department, and they were kind of tracking arms transfers to Argentina during the war. And they repeatedly found that the Israelis were kind of covertly sending arms to Israel, setting up kind of covert bank accounts in Switzerland. They were using Peru, which was sympathetic to the Argentines, as a conduit to covertly transfer arms. And once they had obtained that intelligence, since the Israelis were not listening to their kind of very clear concerns, they started to leak it to the British press. So they used the Insight team at the Sunday Times, and they leaked to the Financial Times as well. They basically had sympathetic journalists within the British press to whom they could leak this intelligence and try to kind of put additional pressure on the Israelis to stop what they were doing. But rather than really making any dent or any difference to what the Israelis were doing, the Israeli government was furious about the negative publicity that they were getting over arms sales to Argentina during the Falklands. And one way that they tried to kind of counteract it was they ostensibly received a letter from a serving RAF officer who basically harangued the Israeli embassy in London over the arms sales to Argentina. He was basically saying, how could you supply arms to a country that famously harbours Nazi war criminals? And he finished the letter by saying, long live the PLO, which was the Palestine Liberation Organization. He also said he would contribute to any money boxes going around for the PLO as well. And so the Israelis received this letter in London, and they forwarded it on to the Foreign Office to say, look at these horrible letters that we're receiving. How could you allow this to happen? These were the kind of methods and tactics that they used to try and limit the negative press attention over the issue in Britain. But the British government effectively responded, if you don't want negative press attention, then you can simply just stop arming Argentina. And of course, they didn't do that.
John, you mentioned that Argentina was harbouring Nazi war criminals. I mean, can you tell us a bit more about the character of the Argentine regime when it invaded the Falklands or Malvinas?
Yeah, I mean, one of the ironies is that the UK government was actually, well, had been negotiating for the transfer of sovereignty over the Falkland Islands to Argentina for the previous 15 or so years before the invasion. And those negotiations were ongoing, I think, within months of the invasion itself. And there were many people within the British Foreign Office that were quite sympathetic to Argentina's claim. I mean, this is an archipelago that's about 6,000 miles from London. I mean, it's an obvious hangover from Britain's colonial era. But in terms of the repression at the heart of the Argentine dictatorship, I mean, yes, it was brutal. This was a regime that, disappeared some 30,000 people, civilians, suspected leftists would be rounded up in the night, transferred to brutal torture camps, and then never seen again. Many of them were dropped from helicopters or planes into the Pacific Ocean. I mean, this is a horrendous regime. And of course, in addition to that, it was anti-Semitic. A disproportionate 10% of those who had disappeared under the regime were Jewish, who were tortured in Argentine prison and torture camps that were, the walls were done with Nazi insignia, swastikas, and so on. Of course, this was the country that had harbored various Nazi war criminals as well, including Adolf Eichmann. So I mean, and this comes up in the declassified files as well. I mean, the Foreign Office is saying to the Israeli government, the British public are not going to understand why Israel is arming a regime that is so explicitly, overtly anti-Semitic, as was the Argentine dictatorship. And the Israeli argument is effectively this will improve the condition of Argentina's Jewish population if we continue to sell this oppressive regime arms. And of course, this was not only logically ridiculous, but it was also totally ineffective. I mean, during the 1980s, the incident of anti-Semitism in Argentina only continued to rise.
And turning now to the current day in Israel's relations with Europe, we see a similar pattern in terms of alliances with, if not overtly anti-Semitic regimes, certainly far-right movements, places like France, Germany, and particularly Hungary now. I understand Netanyahu's first visit to a country that's a member of the International Criminal Court could be to Hungary, where Viktor Orban plays on this kind of anti-Semitic trope of railing against anyone who's received funding from George Soros to delegitimize the opposition there.
Yeah, I think it's the inverse in some ways. So you obviously have Viktor Orban in Hungary, who's laundered anti-Semitic conspiracy theories surrounding George Soros. You have National Rally in France, Marine Le Pen, and has been very close to Israel, key supporter of Israel throughout the genocide in Gaza. Her father was a notorious anti-Semite. He said the Holocaust was a mere detail of history. And you also have Javier Milei in Argentina, another far-right government, all of which have shown their support for Israel. And I think part of that is because they see Israel as a kind of ethno-nationalist, far-right regime that they have a lot of sympathy for, particularly in the targeting of Muslims. So in a sense, they're using Israel as a way to show that they can't be fascist because they're allied with Israel, the Jewish state. Whereas in fact, they're ideologically aligned with the fascistic elements within the Israeli government.
And the files that you found about the Falklands War came from the Foreign Office archives. The Ministry of Defence will have its own papers about it, but you've been denied access to those and are currently trying to get to them through freedom of information requests. Now, maybe the Ministry of Defence don't want to highlight this history because they have in fact bought an air defence system for the Falklands from none other than an Israeli arms company. So they seem to have perhaps quite short memories at the Ministry of Defence about this conflict. I should say Declassified is probably the only media organisation in the UK doing this kind of investigative journalism about Israel, using UK government official documents that we're unearthing at the National Archives. So if you like the kind of work that John's doing, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. That will help this video reach a wider audience, and you can also donate if you're able to through the super thanks button below, or on our website you can join Declassified from £303 a month. Thanks for watching.